Thanks again for respecting and entering into the silence. I appreciate it. I learned literally 10 seconds before silence starts, because somebody who won't be named was watching on a laptop in the back, that we actually have an American Pope, Cardinal Prevost from Chicago, which is, so I got my wish to be able to announce. All right, our next speaker is responsible for the republication of his father's book called Sensus Communis, Synesthesia and the Soul, which I had the honor of writing the introduction to. And it'll be out June 17th, Andrew?
It arrived today.
It arrived today in Canada. He hasn't even seen it yet. We tried our best to get copies. It's really an excellent book. So Andrew's going to explain what sensus communis means. And it's been a theme that's been running throughout the entire day. So with the silence and with our panels this morning, Andrew couldn't be set up better, I think. Andrew's a poet, educator, researcher, and founder of the McLuhan Institute, which exists to preserve and continue the tradition of exploration into the nature and effects of human technologies, begun by his grandfather, Marshall McLuhan, in the mid-20th century, and continued by his father, Eric McLuhan. Please join me in welcoming Andrew McLuhan.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everybody. It's really lovely to see some familiar faces and to meet some new ones, which maybe will be familiar next time around. Hopefully that's 18 months or fewer away. I just got the news that the book arrived, which is fantastic. I am going to discuss the book and the Sensus Communis and some other things, taking a little bit of a roundabout route. It's a very difficult subject. It really is an honor to be here, and I appreciate your time and attention and ask for some grace as I address some topics related to human transformation and change in general, and even relating to metanoia in particular, if less directly. In the short time allowed me, I'm going to discuss my family's work in grappling with the, as Marshall McLuhan put it, personal and social consequences of media, specifically as they apply to the last work my father, Eric McLuhan, published in his lifetime, The Sensus Communis, Synesthesia and the Soul, which he subtitled an Odyssey, and which he referred to as an odd essay in a characteristic play on words. The book was essentially self-published in 2015 and is now printed with an introduction by no other than our host, Luke Burgess. And it's my subject today. It's a somewhat unnerving thing to do for a few reasons. For one, it's a very challenging subject, which I don't think I can claim a perfect grasp of. And the book covers many more topics than can be dealt with directly in a short time. So that's one difficulty. To speak on it at all suggests an authority I don't claim. But that said, I'm going to give it a shot since I've been invited to, and since the authority, the author, Eric McLuhan, died in 2018, making the most qualified person unable to be here in the flesh, if not necessarily in spirit. Plus, as I've just set up McLuhan Institute Books, an imprint of Canada's Assembly Press, which is where you can find the book, to publish it and other McLuhan works like it, I have, to my horror, set myself up to speak for it. And I really didn't think that through when I decided to republish it. At the first version of this conference, Novitate, 18 months ago, I came to speak on a subject also covered in the Sensus Communis, mimesis. Now, mimesis is popularly understood as a mechanism responsible for human desire, wanting, as Luke's book announces. But there's another distinct meaning to the term, and that is as a description of a mode or mechanism of experience. It relates to the experience of the poetic audience before literacy, whereby the hearer was not merely separate from the story, but for all intents and purposes became part of it in ways we are becoming increasingly familiar with today. as the once powerful effects of the phonetic alphabet seem to vanish before our eyes. I think this is somewhat like what they call method acting, where the actor ceases to act and instead disappears into the character, becomes the character. Eric Havelock wrote the foundational text on this, preface to Plato, in 1963, and discussions of mimesis in this sense have appeared in McLuhan works since. When I first heard my father talk about the subject a decade ago, I had no idea what on earth he was going on about. 10 years later, I think I'm making progress. It's tough going. I'm a little comforted by Luke's remark, I think he mentions it in his introduction, that he read the Sensus Communis 5 or more times before he felt he could comment on it. That he read it once is gratifying. That he took the trouble to wrestle with it is a testament to its importance. And that he agreed to write an introduction is humbling, so thank you, Luke. Perhaps the main obstacle facing my family's work in general is that it is too far outside the conventional understanding and treatment of, approaches to, the subjects it addresses. It uses literature and literary criticism as a foundation, and many arts and artists as a guide. Worse, the work frequently employs pun and paradox, like the medium is the message. And as a poet, when Luke said, setting our devices aside, I hear divisives. It's peculiar. Maybe it's a McLuhan thing, I don't know, more than a poet thing. Similarly, hearing the topic metanoia, I eventually heard metannoyance, which, the function of a pun in ambiguity is partly in its ability to generate other thoughts. And I can't help thinking the role of annoyance in transformation and change. So much waits until you're sufficiently annoyed before you actually do something about it or force a confrontation. Every culture and every age has its favorite mode of perception and knowledge that it is inclined to prescribe for everybody and everything, said my grandfather in 1964. A year later, he said, I don't explain, I explore, to a frustrated audience. Umberto Eco missed the point, and in his review of Understanding Media, insisted, among other things, that the message is the message. But Marshall wasn't just trying to annoy people for the sake of some perverse pleasure or personal attention. As he wrote to Ezra Pound in 1951, I am an intellectual thug, he declared, distracting the triggermen, needling the somnambulists. It is the same with all human technology, whatever, from language and clothing to Sputnik. There is a continual and reciprocal putting on of things made and of makers and users in a dream of continual transformation, he wrote in 72. Marshall McLuhan's general concern was change. My kind of communication is a study of transformation, whereas information theory and all the existing theories of communication that I know of are theories of transportation, he said. In the Sensus Communis, Eric McLuhan says it this way: the causes of these dislocations are not ideological, but perceptual. The Sensus Communis, Synesthesia and the Soul is a book described as an essay of an extraordinary scope and depth. You might say it's not a book for everybody. In his introduction to the new edition out now, Luke offers that this short book has done more to help me understand the modern challenge of both communicating and receiving truth than any other book written in the 21st century. I mention that because these are not easy subjects, and the Sensus Communis is not an easy read, but these are vital topics, and I think worth the effort. Dad wrote in the copy he gave me, Andrew, some common sense to chew on. Love Dad. He was always there with the jokes. When I first heard him talk about this book at a lecture in 2016, it made close to no sense at all. I've been reading at least a few pages of it most mornings this spring in advance of the reprint and in preparation for moments like this. And these years later, it makes more, if not perfect sense. During the years since the first publication, I've spent most of my time studying, teaching, talking, and writing about my family's work. And that background has surely made the reading easier, so I'll share some of that background with you here. Marshall McLuhan stated he was interested in the personal and social consequences of technologies. His transformation theory, or theory of change, begins with the individual and spreads to the social, and rests on the assertion that the major personal and collective changes are the result of the forms of our innovations more than their content, their use, or individual application. Not that these things don't matter or are ineffective, but when it comes to the major changes in us individually and socially, it's context, not content that is king, or the medium is the message. The simplest way I've found to put it is that we are the sum of our senses. Our many senses are our interface between everything which is ourself and everything which is not. These senses exist both individually and as a group, with relation or ratio between them. To affect one sense is to affect all senses because of this dynamic relationship. It's also very important to note that these senses are not static or set, but they change by their use or disuse. When we're young, our senses are open and vibrant. We sense and feel at 100%. If we can remember that far back, we'll remember that as not always being pleasant. I now wear reading glasses, add more seasoning to my food, and strain sometimes to hear what was once clear, and this modifies my experience, and my experience is my reality. In Understanding Media, Marshall wrote, "Everybody experiences far more than he understands, yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior, especially in collective matters of media and technology, where the individual is almost inevitably unaware of their effects upon him." Marshall insisted, rightly, that any intentional or deliberate action depends on at least an awareness of a situation and an awareness that something could be done, of agency. Personally, it's of continued fascination to me that at one point in the early 1950s, Marshall McLuhan felt that media were too complex to be able, as he put it, to predict and control. But by the late 1950s, he concluded the exact opposite, that while they may be complex, that there is absolutely no inevitability as long as we're willing to contemplate the situation. It's from The Medium is the Massage. His largest effort toward aiding awareness and agency was the 1964 guide, Understanding Media, where he writes, "The present book, in seeking to understand many media, the conflicts from which they spring and the even greater conflicts to which they give rise, holds out the promise of reducing these conflicts by an increase in human autonomy." In the Sensus Communis, Eric McLuhan frequently refers to Jacques Lucy-Rand in his memoir, And There Was Light. My grandfather also referred to Lucy-Rand as a convenient and convincing support for his argument about how media impact on us on a sensory level and just how profoundly that impact shapes and reshapes us. In exquisite detail, Lucy-Rand describes the childhood accident which robbed him of his sight and opened his senses to an unknown world of sensation and experience. He describes how, as his visual faculties dimmed, his other faculties came alive. In Appendix 6 of Eric's book, he describes an experiment he ran in the 70s to test this. And this is something I appreciated about my father and grandfather's work, is that it never rests on theory or on hypothesis, but tests and on the practical. If we left everything to hypothesis and theory, nothing would change. I suppose that could be a good or a bad thing. But the experiment Eric McLuhan ran involved a volunteer group of students in a weekend retreat where they were blindfolded upon departure. It was a nice experiment that Luke ran just a little while ago. Although it's kind of weird to break that silence with all this, but anyway. The attendants never saw the place they were delivered to before arriving. With other volunteers on hand to make sure everyone was safe, the blindfolded group had to do everything for themselves. The results were fast and remarkable, if not totally surprising to Eric, but they were profound enough to make deep and lasting impressions. What the experience of Lucy Wren and those who volunteered for Eric McLuhan's blind experiment shows is that the senses do exist in a delicate balance, and to affect one is to affect all. And that when you change that balance or mix, you fundamentally change experience and what it means to be you, what it means to be human. Think about how different your life would be as a blind person, where the visual holds no value. The texture of your shirt will matter more than the color. Why paint the walls of your home? In a culture of the blind, our world looks and feels and sounds quite different. Art galleries and homes hold no paintings. We don't eat with our eyes. And there's no social media. You turn off your ears, and the effect is no less profound. A fundamental principle of McLuhan's media theory is that our senses are not static or inert channels that information or data or sensation or messages pass through from a source without effect. The senses are modified in their use, and to affect one is to affect all. Any culture is an order of sensory preferences, he says. Also in Understanding Media, he says, slang is not based on theories, but immediate experience. The student of media will not only value slang as a guide to changing perception, but he will also study media as bringing about new perceptual habits. Once we have surrendered our senses and nervous systems to the private manipulation of those who would try to benefit from taking a lease on our eyes and ears and nerves, we don't really have any rights left. A year after publishing Understanding Media in a landmark, if little-known essay called The Relation of Environment to Anti-Environment, Marshall went further in his discussion of technology and the senses, saying, the need for our time is the need for measuring the sensory thresholds and of discovering exactly what changes occur in these thresholds as a result of the advent of any particular technology. With such knowledge in hand, it would be possible to program a reasonable and orderly future for any human community. Such knowledge would be the equivalent of a thermostatic control for room temperature. It would seem only reasonable to extend such controls to all the sensory thresholds of our being. We have no reason to be grateful to those who juggle the thresholds in the name of haphazard innovation. Okay. So to the book title, Sensus Communis. In the Sensus Communis, Eric McLuhan goes more deeply into the senses and takes us on a strange journey. It was an unexpected journey, in that it was much like most of my family's work, and maybe this talk as well. Eric put it this way in his ironically titled essay, Marcia McLuhan's Theory of Communication. If you begin with a theory, then one way or another your research winds up making the case for or against the truth of the theory. Begin with a theory, you begin with the answer. Begin with observation, you begin with questions. The Sensus Communis is truly an observational odyssey of questions on questions. It's a very difficult book to read because it's so thick with provocations which make you stop and consider. The provocations are so rich and fruitful, it's at times hard to read more than a page or two, yet it's equally hard to put down for long. The work fits very neatly into his father's earlier work, and Eric has done a vital job here with the extended essay that he says deserves a full book-length treatment. Quote, "For half a century now, it has been a commonplace of media studies that each technology extends one or another sense or faculty, according it a sort of hyperesthesia, which has then the effect of numbing the bodily senses extended and rearranging the interplay between the other senses, what we have been calling the sensus communis." I think of the sensus communis as a sort of operating system or control mechanism. He calls the sensus communis the interplay between the senses. And the book deals with three major sets of senses, the bodily senses, which we all know, sight, touch, smell, and so on. the senses of Scripture, or exegesis, the traditional medieval interpretation of religious text, which are also senses or modes of experience, the literal, the allegorical, the moral, and the anagogical. He also deals with the Christian virtues of faith, hope, and charity, or love, which he also discusses as modes of experience, as ways of knowing, as senses. Each of these sets operates as a group, has an interior relation or balance or sensus communis, but he adds, the human common sense is one thing, not three things, one thing with three dimensions, corporal, intellectual, and theological. Synesthesia is a term to describe what happens when the senses cross or blend with each other. Long and unusual phenomena, it's becoming a more common human experience as cultures built on the phonetic alphabet with its power to separate drift further from that supportive structure. And as we know, when a foundation erodes, a structure tends to collapse. Oh, I do have one last page. There we go. So to the soul. In the book, he says, it is the soul that animates the body and makes it human. Without the body, the human being is, to say the least, profoundly disoriented and perhaps somewhat less than human. There's a long discussion in the book on the modern fact that the body is no longer, as it has been for much of human experience, a limiting factor. Each of us spends large parts of our day having a sort of out-of-body experience, as when we are online, we're not just here, but we're also there, or as the movie title put it, everywhere all at once. There is actually a very prolonged discussion about what he calls this discarnate condition, and it deserves more mention here, but he kind of winds up with this. Separating ourselves from our bodily function, which McLuhan identified as a major effect of electric technologies beginning with the telegraph, fundamentally alters our relationship with our bodies. Experience, meaning, identity. Everything about us that the body anchors is adrift, up for grabs. And the evidence is abundant. It's everywhere around us. Though the cause is less obvious, an awareness of how the senses operate individually and as groups, and how experience and meaning follow suit, may bring us closer to clarity. With deep changes to bodily experience come deep changes to bodily meaning, with deep implications and meaning for our souls. Thank you. Are we out of time? Sorry, it took longer to get through that than I thought, so I guess there's no times for questions, but happy to chat.